You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
Would you like to swing on a star? Carry moonbeams home in a jar and be better off than you are? Or won't you rather be a mule? A mule is an animal with long funny ears. He kicks up at anything he hears.
His back is brawny and his brain is weak. He's just plain stupid with a stubborn streak.
And by the way, if you hate the ghost, shh, you may grow up to be a mule. Or would you like to swing on a star? Carry moon.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is
Marshall Preddy.
Marshall. Welcome back. It's been a while.
It's been a while. I'm glad to be back.
And you have chosen a movie that finally I have seen, thanks to you, that I've been being told to see since it was in the theater, and that is
Hudson Hawk, the Bruce Willis brainchild, Hudson Hawk.
Yeah, it's this movie's reputation precedes it.
It definitely does. It definitely does. You know, it was miscast a little bit as a blockbuster. That was, but they spent $90 million on it. This was supposed to be an action heist movie coming out, and it's a lot weirder than that would indicate, given where it sits in Bruce Willis's IMDb. This is not Die Hard.
Right.
This is not Last Boy Scout, which we did a few months ago. This is I don't want to say it's a singular movie in Bruce Willis's career, because he actually has a weirder reputation than you would think for doing sort of madcap, absurdist comedies. That's a thing in his bag. And it really, even since he did Moonlighting, the television series that he became famous for in the 80s, he's always had a little bit of the sort of, the sort of old Hollywood prankster in his approach and in his comedy. So it's not surprising, but I think that a couple of things kind of doomed this movie. One, they spent a lot of money on it, and it was troubled from the beginning. I mean, there was infighting during the production. There was a lot of so a word got out that it was a quote unquote troubled production. That was during, and they were, they're trying to sort of, I think there were rewrites, I think there were reshoots, they were doing stuff for this movie. And then when it hit, I just think it was marketed as, it's going to be this sort of action comedy, but it's not an action comedy in the way, I think when it hit theaters, people were literally like, what the hell is this? This is a really strange movie. It's a lot of it's intentionally funny, but not funny at all, because the jokes are either bad or they don't land or whatever. You really have to be on a wavelength with this movie to enjoy it. And so I think it was at the time that it came out in 91 considered like an Ishtar level box office bomb.
Yeah, I was completely shocked when I read it was like 90 something million. Like, it feels more like a 15 or $20 million movie of the era.
That's it, and that's what I think it started off as. Bruce Willis conceived this movie even before he was famous. This was him and a buddy. It's a passion project. It does not seem like the kind of movie that would get $90 million spent on it. it's something, I think something about the era that it was in made it a much more expensive, a flamboyantly expensive movie for the era, depending on, considering what it is. And I think they punched it up a little bit. There's a lot more sort of action set pieces than you would normally see in a sort of what I think is really kind of a old school Hollywood heist. It's almost like a slapstick take on an old school Hollywood heist movie is really the soul of this movie. But then they turn it into like this sort of a Bruce Willis / Eddie Murphy action comedy is what I think what it's aiming for. And it's just a weird mix that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, its reputation kind of precedes it. And I will be honest, like I had no idea what to expect. I didn't really know what the movie was about. I knew was it had Bruce Willis in a hat, mm-hmm. and he was some sort of, I didn't even know he was a cat burglar. That was news to me. I went into this thing just not knowing anything. And the only other thing I knew was Sandra Bernhard was in it.
Yeah.
And then as the
really in it.
What's that?
Really in it.
Yeah.
Very over the top performances in this movie from just about everybody, but hers is the over the toppiest. Consistent with her off-screen persona as well.
Yeah, yeah. And it I think this movie, if it hit now, audiences would, especially if it were just dumped to like HBO, people would probably get it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think would get them there is, and I don't think this was intended at the time, I don't think it was the DNA of the movie, but thanks to comic book movies, people would be more ready for a completely crazy world that this movie posits.
Yes.
And I was reading a review. I won't talk too much about reviews because I didn't get a chance to read as many as I would have liked. But if you go to like Wikipedia, they quote some of the reviews. And I think Ebert or somebody said like, well, this movie should have been Aiello and Bruce Willis being the funny bits and everybody else being straight. And I completely disagree with that assessment. But I also think that's how that movie was seen as being weird and a flop, because in 1990 or whenever the hell this came out, that would have been the formula. And this thing so defied formula, it just drove people insane. I think it was not meeting what a middling comedy. And it's interesting to kind of go back to that period because you're coming off of reviewers in an audience that they were always looking for like this weird authenticity, or this like movies have to somehow reflect the real world, which is the dumbest possible stance I think you can have about film. It should be able to be whatever the hell you want it to be. But I think that audiences essentially didn't know what to do. And I think the director, because of that, there just was no context. If you look at his filmography, his name's Lehman. Mm-hmm. I mean, he does comedies, but they're all like pretty straight stuff aside from Heathers. And so getting the guy who did Heathers on like a shoestring budget, and it was both the writer and director worked on it.
That's right.
It's a really strange next step for them. It doesn't make any sense to go from Heathers to this. But if you're not familiar with the movie, you should probably do the official South Coast Media movie synopsis, which is going to be freaking impossible with this thing. So I'll try and keep it as clean as possible. Bruce Willis is a cat burglar who is released from, he's finished his time. His parole officer, before he even steps out of prison, is trying to get him into another heist. By the time he gets back to the bar that he half owns with Danny Aiello, the mob is there in the form of Frank Stallone saying, no, you've got to do this heist. And shenanigans ensue. Turns out that they're actually all in pursuit of pieces of some device that Leonardo da Vinci created that could turn lead to gold, alchemy. And there's a eventually you find out there's a corporate couple who are crazy billionaires in the form of Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhardt, who are going to use this to, for some reason, destroy the economy, which somehow will benefit them, or at least they think it's funny. And so the Vatican's involved, the mob is involved, the CIA is involved. And that's probably all you need to know. Is that a fair assessment? Is there any Andy McDowell's there running around?
Andy McDowell. So it's good to know who works for whom, right? So yeah. Andy McDowell is an agent for the Vatican. She is involved in this, and I think that there's different allegiances. It's very confusing from a plot perspective, right? Because the Vatican is also involved in this plot and is sort of helping or hindering. I'm not sure that they even know in terms of the heist. And then there's was it James Coburn?
Yeah, Coburn.
Who is the CIA agent. He leads a ring of CIA operatives who are all named after candy bars for some reason. And so they are involved with the Mayflowers, who are the billionaires. And they are trying, as you said, to steal 3 priceless Da Vinci artifacts or masterpieces, because in each of those pieces, right, there's part of the crystal that's the secret ingredient. This crystal is the thing that enables Da Vinci's miraculous alchemy machine turn lead into gold. So that's the idea. I mean, it's got a lot of like misdirection, but the idea is it's very video gamey. Get the 3 pieces, pull them together. Now you can make lead into gold and thereby destroy the economy in some sort of weird, harebrained Fight Club kind of plot. We're gonna blow up the economy by basically devaluing gold is the idea, because they'll flood the market with so much basically fake gold that it will then be devalued. That's the idea, and they are recruiting basically Bruce Willis's character is the best cat burglar in the world to go steal them these things. And so that's the movie in a nutshell.
Yeah, it was kind of funny on the whole like gold plot. I'm currently reading at long last here at age 47, Asimov's Foundation. And I've hit the point where there's a whole plot I'm reading where there's one planet's economy is still based on gold. And they're like, well, we can just make gold like with this device. And so it was crazy that I'm like literally reading that chapter. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Bruce has some crazy synchronicity.
Oh man.
It's I liked the movie. I want to start there. I didn't really know what to expect. I think Michael had said he would rather continue to have COVID than rewatch Hudson Park. And but I also recognize, like, I talked about this on a podcast recently. Like, I tend to find these movies that, and I think it's a good thing I never pursued my film degree as a profession, because I'm always like, yeah, no, that was a great idea, John Carter of Mars. Like, that was a fantastic idea, Southland Tales. Like, and I recognize, I don't think I have some like super quirky taste in movies or anything like that, because I also like Marvel movies and whatnot. But I found a lot in this movie to enjoy, but I also recognized it was not successful. Like, I couldn't figure out if they needed to do less or they needed to do more. And I could never quite figure that out over the course of the movie. There were times when I was watching it and I was like, I'm enjoying the hell out of this scene. And then the next scene, I was like, this is a mess. This scene that followed it immediately, just absolutely, like, I loved Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhardt.
Yes,
in this movie. And apparently they hate it. Apparently they both won't talk about it. It's considered to be the biggest mistake of their careers, which I don't blame them. Like,
Sure.
They took it on the chin when this thing came out. I think they're both like at their manic best in this movie.
Yes.
But then like they have the scene, and then it's like the Bruce Willis and Danny Aiello fighting over the gun down the steps of the building. Like that whole sequence didn't make any sense. Like even after it was over with, I had to kind of pause for a beat and be like, what the hell just happened? So it wasn't funny. It didn't make any sense. And there's just stuff that just doesn't click in this movie in a way that feels almost amateurish or hacky. Like,
yeah.
Which is unforgivable in $100 million movie from this period.
It's really it's a real struggle, and I think one of the things I give this movie credit for is it's a one of one. Like this is like, and coming from Bruce Willis with his friend, I'm trying to remember who's his name, sort of hatched this movie and like basically had this story. It's Bruce Willis's only writing credit, and they certainly don't do this anymore. This is out of the brains of these people. They made this sort of like madcap farcical heist movie that is it's cribbing from a lot of different areas, but it is like, it's really, they certainly don't do this anymore. But there was a time in the 80s, and obviously all the time in old Hollywood, there's a time in the 80s and you can sort of like in the 90s when they would just make weird movies like this because they said, you know what, we have good personalities we can put in, there's Big Trouble in Little China. There's Joe versus the Volcano. There's like, it's not like there aren't these sorts of movies that are sort of like even apart from the more absurdist types of movies like Monty Python or Naked Gun or Airplane or kind of things that are obvious spoofs. There are also these movies like, The Princess Bride, where they're fantasy. It's like, that's the idea. They're building a world. It's a fantasy world where you sort of have to say, okay, first thing I'm going to do is buy into this universe. Yeah. And the movie, to its credit, tries to set that up with its framing device. It's sort of very similar to The Princess Bride, where you're opening the storybook and you're diving into something. They're preparing you for the lack of reality that you're about to engage in, and you start off, of course, in the 1400s, and Leonardo da Vinci is sort of like, I put this in my notes. What a great day for him, right? When we meet Leonardo da Vinci, he is painting the Mona Lisa. He's working on that. Yeah. He is putting the finishing touches on a machine that turns lead and gold, which is based alchemy, right? That's long been, that was a legit goal in the Middle Ages, right? We're going to turn lead into gold, or turn some different metals. Before science was science, they thought this was possible, and there was a lot of energy for real devoted into alchemy. So he perfects alchemy, and then while he's working on that, he successfully launches his flying machine. Now, Dolly Parton wrote Jolene and I Will Always Love You on the same day. So, that's what we're talking about here. This is a really good day that Da Vinci had. And then so you start off from that, and that sets the plot in motion. Now they show you the crystals there that make up the gold machine, that are the sort of secret engine of the gold machine. And of course that the movie is based on sort of getting those. And the rest of the movie is really just I really love, it takes a big swing. It's really trying to be this sort of slapstick, old Hollywood style comedy, and not a subtle one. We're talking Three Stooges type slapstick. Yeah. We're talking like very broad vaudeville style comedy that they're trying to pull off here, along with the old, Sinatra era. This is like a very, very, a lot of love for the Rat Pack in here. This is a madcap movie. It's a fantasy, and it's certainly not meant to say, hey, this is not meant to be the same thing as Die Hard. But that's the way it was sold. And what confuses things further is that it has a lot of that DNA, that 90s action movie DNA in it, that 80s, 90s action movie DNA in it. They really do try to fuse those things together to take this utterly absurdist kind of like Monty Python / airplane level spoof comedy, or even older than that, sort of old Hollywood slapstick style comedy, infuse that with a modern action movie. And it is fascinating, but it is not successful.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think it really spirals in the last, it will not end. But but in the
it's only an hour and 40 minutes.
Right. Well, we paused it for one reason or another at 45 minutes in, and I couldn't believe so much happens in the first 45 minutes of this movie.
Right.
I thought we were easily an hour and 10 minutes into the movie at that point. But in the last part of it just feels kind of like weird and lazy, and it does call back to things that you know about the characters, like we're going to sing Swinging on a Star or whatever while we go about our merry way blowing up this castle thing that we're in. But they also don't, it's suddenly like there's no tension suddenly in the movie, like at a really crucial, important part. And they even treat like Danny Aiello's pseudo death as just a thing that happens in front of them. Like no one's really that concerned about it.
Doesn't have weight. That's right. It's like hard because they're like the next minute they're back to the comedy kind of.
Yeah.
Like he dies in that, and there's sort of like, there's like a split second where you can see sort of like there's concern, and then that leaves.
Yeah. I question, the only casting I question in this whole thing is Aiello. I think he looks like he's having a great time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I'm with him on that journey, but I think he's a great actor. I think he can do comedy just fine. It just feels like a weird fit. But I also remember at this point, for whatever reason, like every year Hollywood was picking some other like weird middle-aged guy that they were going to just decide was the it guy for the year. It's like, now it's Danny DeVito's year. Now it's Danny Aiello's year or whatever. And
I thought he had I liked it. Yeah, I liked him. I liked it. I thought the strength of the movie was the way the interplay between the actors, which I really thought they played off one another well. I thought Bruce Willis and Aiello, even more so than Willis and McDowell, had real on-screen chemistry. It's like buddies, like you bought their bickering, you bought them finishing each other. So I did, at least. I really liked that was maybe the most enjoyable part of it for me.
I think it's that the McDowell is interesting because I think McDowell is a fascinating case study and someone who was never a good actor who had an amazing career.
Yeah.
Like she always is on the same tone. Her energy is within like 5 degrees only ever within a movie. And then somehow in this movie, I feel like it serves her better than in almost anything else I've seen her in. Like, because she's manages to hold the straight-faced thing against the absurdity and she's absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And but she never feels like, I feel like Aiello is constantly like winking, like he's in on the joke in this movie. And I feel like she's more in the world in some ways than even he is. And he feels like he should have been more in the world to me. But anyway,
I see that. Now I see that because I think I get what you're saying about him. It's like there's so everybody else is so over the top and sort of locked in, even McDowell's character, locked into the wavelength, the weird sort of madcap wavelength. And Aiello does in a way make it seem like some of these, like I'm thinking of the scene where he shows up and confesses that he was in on, like, everybody is manipulating Bruce Willis's character. And then he eventually, once he's in Italy, he finds out even his friend, his best friend, who he co-owns the bar with, it's like, hey, I thought this job would be good for you. I was in on this too with the Mario Brothers trying to get you set up for this gig. I thought you would like it, blah, blah, blah. So even he's the only person who wants him to go straight. Everybody else wants to use him for his cat burglar abilities, including his friend. And when Aiello has that discussion with him in that moment, and in others too, I think, you really feel like he's in the action movie. He's like, this is kind of there's elements of this, that this is kind of a movie about the mob, but it really isn't, except for him. He's in there and he gives it this, he's throwing the tone off a little bit. I think you're right. I like the chemistry a lot between them, but I see what you're saying. Yeah. Part of the tone problems are probably related to seeing Aiello in this movie.
Yeah, and I so at the end when he like has his golf bag and pulls out the rocket launcher out of it, and then they start singing, but that's kind of how you interfaced with the character previously. To me, it just felt a little bit off, and it also sets it at the beginning off a little bit because it feels a little more serious at the beginning. Like, oh, the neighborhood's changing, blah blah blah. It isn't played as a joke. It's played as you've been gone a long time. And so when it starts creeping into being weirder and weirder, which Frank Stallone is selling the shit out of. Like, I've never seen Frank Stallone actually good in anything. But he knows exactly, this is a cartoon gangster. This is not,
yes.
This is not a gangster.
Well, it starts like a mob movie, right? It starts like, oh, you're getting out of prison. This is a mob movie with the way it starts. It starts like, oh, you're getting out of prison and we need you to do a job. And no, you got to do the job. You don't have a choice to do the job. We've seen that a million times.
Yeah.
But it's not that. And everything but Aiello is sort of telling you that. But you're right. Aiello there's kind of the bar and their conversation about what's wrong at the bar, everything is kind of leading you in. It does feel like it's got those mob movie tropes that it sells probably too hard, and it takes a little bit away from the sort of weird slapstick sort of spoof energy that they're trying to communicate.
Yeah. And so when I was thinking about like, well, does it do less? Does it do more? It's like, well, there's this whole thing where they set it up like we should be concerned about the changes to the neighborhood and what's happened. Right. It's moot to the movie.
No, absolutely unneeded. And yeah, agreed.
As is the whole Da Vinci thing at the beginning and that's where I'm like, so you guys built all these sets, hired all these actors. This had to have taken a week, to film all of this stuff for this one sequence, because it's fairly complicated stuff. And then when they went to Rome and they never left Rome, I was like, oh my God. And that's when I started kind of clicking into how much this thing must have cost. I'm like, you guys are really filming on location.
On location in Rome.
Yeah. And just my God, the money that they threw at this thing. But, and it wasn't really until the Mayflower showed up that I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I see what this movie thinks it's doing. Got it.
And there's hints, right? Like there's like, you sort of start at the movie, he gets out, like the first thing they do is, there's like this weird Nintendo running joke. I'm like, did Nintendo pay for this? It's like, but I think there's kind of like, they're trying to inject this sort of, on some level, I think they want you to think, hey, this is like a video game. Hey, this is like a fantasy. And so they're sort of inserting that, the mob family are literally the Mario Brothers. Right. There's like this weird sort of, hey, you're going to play some Nintendo, bang some chicks, and honking the horn. It's like, it's very over the top. There's this whole cappuccino gig where he's like, his cappuccino keeps getting ruined by first he stops for the coffee on his way out of prison. All he wants is a cappuccino. That goes through the whole movie where he's got this, like, he's just trying to enjoy a nice cappuccino, and they keep ruining his cappuccino in all these different ways. Like, let me say this. I didn't say it explicitly. I like this movie. I like this movie when I saw it. I like this movie now. It's a fascinating. It is a failure. There's a lot that's bad about this movie. But when I walked out of the movie seeing it, I have a clear memory of walking out feeling kind of magical about it, feeling really good about this movie and the mood that it put me in when I first saw it. I didn't feel that way this time, but there's a lot that I liked about it. And that was one of those things.
I think if I would have seen this in high school, I would have obsessed over it. I'll be honest. I would have loved it, and I would have been trying to sell people on it. But the interesting thing to me about the cappuccino thing was that felt to me like the kind of business that they would use in action movies in the 90s as the thing that they were setting up that was the guy's thing.
Right.
I can't give you a specific example, but they, if you were watching a cheesy action movie at that time, they just want one thing or whatever, or they profess a love for something and it would come back a few times to give the character something other than I have to murder, mobsters or whatever.
Right. He's the good guy with the good heart. And they sort of like, hey, let's give him a detail. And I think that's a spoof on that. Like, I think to some extent, some of the conventions they're including here along the way are very much a spoof on this, what it was by then, a standard formula of the action movie or even the action comedy movie. I just love it that first he spills his cappuccino. Then he gets there. There's a cappuccino machine at the bar. This is all pre-Starbucks. Like, cappuccino is not a common movie trope or even life trope. Like, that's not a thing. It is, in fact, it's almost completely a European phenomenon. Nobody's drinking cappuccinos in 91. That comes later in the culture. But then there's like this steampunk cappuccino machine at the bar. His cappuccino gets shot there. And that's when you're sort of realizing, the violence in this movie is at least in some ways, very Roadrunner-y, very Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote kind of thing, except when it's not. I think it's disrupted a little bit because there's real violence in here. There's real explosions. There's real, again, tonally, it doesn't quite get the thing right. But he gets his cappuccino shot by one of the mobsters. It's like, wow, that's a very risky shot in a crowded bar. And you just sort of go with it. Because that's like, the guy shot my cappuccino. Hey, you got me, but way to bust my balls. That I thought that was funny. And then later, of course, Andy McDowell drugs him with a cappuccino. It was like, this doesn't taste like cappuccino. Oh, maybe I put too much alpha fluoride in it. So I thought that was a good running gag. It had its moments, but tonally, I think tone, and some of the reviews I read said the same thing. Tone is this movie's number one problem. It wants to be funny. It wants to be kind of an old Hollywood madcap sort of slapstick comedy. It wants to be, a spoof of a mob movie and a spoof of an action movie. In a lot of ways, it wants to make jokes that you would see in Airplane or in, Monty Python. And it's just all smashed together. It's not the problem. There's a lot to recommend it because it's trying to do a lot and it succeeds on a lot of fronts. It's just that it doesn't all hang together well.
Yeah.
When you get done with it.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was trying to reference some of the old Bing Crosby, Bob Hope movies and things like that the culture has completely lost it in 2022. Still would have been a thing in the 90s. Those things are still running on TV and would have been more of a thing. But I kind of got the feeling that was the relationship they were trying to set up a bit between Bruce Willis and Dana Ayle, including the fact they were singing while they were going along and, trying to have this cute thing of I think it was successful.
Martin,
but it, I will be flat out about I already said how much I liked Richard Grant and Grant and Sandra Bullock or Sandra Bernhard in this, and I would have liked to have seen sometimes that movie.
That's I was going to say exactly that. When they are in the room. And the Pope, not the Pope, the Cardinal's character, the Pope is too. But there's a sort of that movie where the Cardinal's in on it. They're trying to the kooky CIA villains. That's the part that I love the most. Yeah. When they're all in on the, hey, this is a weird kind of slapstick / over the top spoof. I mean, what you would recognize them now, what you would recognize Grant and Bernhardt now as their anime villains. Like at that, they pop off the screen like that with their flamboyant clothes, everything. They're shouting. They are just 10 out of 10 weirdos. And it's awesome. And what I found myself thinking of, and I don't know if you're the same, but I found myself thinking like, I wish that a Terry Gilliam or a Wes Anderson or a Coen brothers would have made this, because it's like the movie that did this right would have been like a Hudsucker Proxy kind of take. That's in my head. That's what I was thinking, is like the successful version of this movie is nailing the tone the way Hudsucker Proxy nailed its tone.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring that up, because I think Hudsucker Proxy is remembered very differently by people who were our age when it came out versus that thing was critically lambasted when it came out.
Yeah.
And for all the same reasons.
Yeah.
The critics did not know what to make of it. And I put it firmly on the weird concreteness that critics wanted out of movies at that time. Like it has to be people being Woody Allen clever or it's crap, which was, the yardstick at the time. And
I think it's a masterpiece. I love Hudsucker Proxy. It's one of my top 5 probably Coen Brothers movies. But everything in that movie, you're right, they didn't get it, but everything is pulling in the same direction in that movie. Like everything is like sort of like of its piece, and this is the same way with Wes Anderson. It's like he's got a way of saying, okay, yes, these people are ridiculous, but they're in a ridiculous world, and everything about it is sort of pointing you in that direction. It's very coherent. And the Coen brothers and Anderson and I think to an extent Terry Gilliam, they're good at that. It's sort of bringing you, letting you into an absurd world and building that world and sort of earning your way into it, like bringing you into that.
Yeah, and I don't know what the decision was to hire Waters and Lehman to work on this. I know that especially around this period, there was a trend, if you had a mega star like Bruce Willis would have been, to just hire a punching bag director. And probably the primo example of that is Judge Dredd, right? I mean, it was Stallone wanted to make a movie and brought in like a 24-year-old who'd made like one indie picture. And like, so someone else took it on the chin when Judge Dredd didn't do well. Like someone else got blamed. It couldn't possibly have been Stallone, even though he was really directing the movie. And, Lehman's credits around this time are stuff like Airheads. I mean, it's not like this guy has this roster of movies. He happened to have Heathers, but Heathers is really, what's his name? Waters, who wrote it, was really Waters' thing that Lehman happened to kind of have a feel for and shot. And that was like a $15 million movie. And I think that was really his sweet spot. And this thing, there's no way with the studio being involved with this much money. I have to assume
it does feel like the studio ruined this at some point, like too many notes, too many cooks. It has that feel of there were a lot of ideas just being grafted onto this movie. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have that because you didn't have the auteur, the kind of person who would have said no, who would have been giving this a consistent point of view, and a consistent approach to building a world.
And if it was left over from Willis's draft, he would have been too close to it by this point to understand what he would have loved it too much to understand. He had to kill his darlings and all the rest of it. But I mean, we've been talking, pretty much only really identified a few things that we liked about it. But I think it's just part of why we're talking about it negatively is it just feels like it was so close. Close.
That's exactly right.
And I would have loved to have seen the movie. I can't think of a director at this time though in 1990 who would have necessarily done this quite right. And I totally
Tim Burton. Like that's what I kept thinking about was Tim Burton's Batman. Was I kept thinking about like especially the prominent costumes and like the use of purple and the henchmen who were all different and all had names. It reminded me of that, and I'm just thinking about how successful Batman pulled off the campiness and the tone.
Yeah.
Even mixing it better. And it's because it takes someone like Burton to sort of meld the absurdity with with the world building that is necessary for that. And I was just thinking, it's like you can see that you're right with Grant and Bernhardt, you get a view into what this movie could have been. But the other key into what I think how awesome this movie could have been was Caruso, right? Was David Caruso.
Oh my God.
Who's revelatory. I didn't remember, of course, Caruso got famous after this movie, not because of this, but because of, his other roles on TV. But he is amazing. And the way his whole character is played, like he's only communicating in these funny cards. It's a cartoon. You realize that the way this is a 1930s cartoon or, video game, or like he's got this, he's like, or Monty Python, where he's got the cards. He's like, when he dies and he pulls out the card, he's like, I always liked you. Yeah. It's so amazing. He's like, you're not in a dream. My name is Kit Kat, where he's like elaborately dressing up as first Bruce Willis and then Andrew McDowell and mimicking them. It's so absurd, but it's the funniest part of the movie. Caruso is hilarious in this movie.
And I would love to actually go back and watch and figure out how long he was in the shots as the statue.
Yes. That's one of the best gags is he turns around and he's the statue. All the best parts of the movie are him. Like the best moments of the movie and the best lines and the thing that made me laugh the funniest were those bits that were like very, very much, this is like, it makes sense if you're like, obviously the Simpsons hadn't taken over yet, but that's what it is. It's that sort of visual sight gag world it's like, that's what you want the entire movie to be. Yeah. And it did not reach the heights, but Caruso is amazing. And the candy bar villains are pretty funny. The belief there. That's the whole movie. That should have been the whole movie.
Yeah, and I'm a big Looney Tunes fan. It felt very Looney Tunes to me at times. The time that I felt it didn't work was at the very, very, very tippy end when Bruce Willis is fighting James Coburn, and they do some like weird sight gag of like Bruce Willis like flopping back and forth, right? But it has a good payoff, but it physically goes to a point that the movie had not been at to that point. But I
went into Three Stooges land.
Yeah. And I do think that there's like that Looney Tunes DNA that kind of like everyone else is trying to put their order on the thing. And Hudson Hawk is kind of this agent of chaos kind of drifting through it. They're doing the Private Eye movie thing where he keeps getting knocked out. But it's it's a lot of fun. I feel bad for everyone having such bad feelings about it. And I've always been a supporter of the Razzies. I want to, because I don't believe, as much as Hollywood likes to jerk itself off with having an awards season, which is just insane that exists, that there needs to be some vinegar, poured over this a bit, right? We should also point out where y'all done fucked up, because it's the funniest to me when those things are the same things getting award nominations, which doesn't happen that often, but it does happen from time to time. This movie got nominated for a bunch of Razzies, and this is the kind of thing that makes me think of the Razzies in kind of a different way of like, well, this movie you were told was bad by the critics.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Like, and a specific sort of taste of movie. Like, it's different from Catwoman, where you watch it and you're like, oh God, like, oh God, what a disaster on every level. This isn't the ideas here aren't bad. It's the execution.
No, they're not.
And
the performances are great. Yeah. I think I love the performances in here. I thought it really hung to the interaction between all the actors. I mean, I was really bought into the scenes. Like, it's almost like a scenes movie more than it is there's scenes, and you love it. You love to see Grant and Bernhard chewing the scenery. I love the comic villains. I love the scenes with the Pope and like where the Pope's like trying to get his TV to come in, and he's like poking it with his staff.
And it's Mr. Ed in Italian. Like, I was just like, I was laughing so hard during that one sequence.
Yes.
Oh my God.
And that's what I like. So I love the spoof satire, like, elements of this movie. And I just wish it had been all that. Like, tonally, they had like, I really enjoyed the movie. I probably didn't like it as much as I did when I first saw it. But I think when I was a kid and I was just starting to get into to Monty Python and Terry Gilliam movies, and I liked it a lot better. I just think Willis is an outstanding comic actor. He has really good timing. He has that. He and Eddie Murphy are in a lot of ways very similar. Like, they're able to play action, sort of actiony type things, but then there's just a lot of the wisecracking and the facial features and the sort of like, to me, it's like it hit me today how similar they were. Like, I'm thinking of Eddie Murphy in Beverly Hills Cop and Bruce Willis, sort of, always, even when he's about to get shot or something, he's always there with the jokes, and he does that in Last Boy Scout too.
Yeah, I think that there's something, and I've talked about this, I'm sure, in other podcasts, but there's something we lost around 2000 of the idea of the scrappy everyman against the much more powerful forces. And I think that's played out in comedy. I think it's definitely played out in like regular action movies, because now everyone's like, they've had 25 years of training and it's like, no, Bruce Willis is a New York cop who is accidentally caught up in forces he has no comprehension of. He has no interest in having comprehension of them, and he's going to ruin their day. He is Bugs Bunny. Yeah. Flat out, he is Bugs Bunny sitting in his hole, and the opera singer is ruining his day when he just wants to play his banjo, and he's going to get revenge. And I am, of course, referring to Long-Haired Hare, the classic Chuck Jones Bugs Bunny cartoon. But that's where Bruce Willis and Eddie Murphy shine. Like, Beverly Hills Cop, even the cops in Beverly Hills are kind of weird and snooty, and he's going to show them how like real people do things, and that the common man can do this with a sense of humor and get it done. It kind of comes in its own way out of like Borscht Belt humor, but Bruce Willis, that's where he, showed up with Moonlighting against, classy Sybil Shepherd in her, Chanel suits, and he's wearing his off the rack JCPenney suit. And that he was that again here. And against the Mayflowers, against the Vatican, against the mob. Like, it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And I think we could use a lot more of that. I guess I'd put it, I don't necessarily have the same nostalgia for a lot of 80s and 90s action that some of my pals do. But I think that is maybe one of the things I miss the most from, especially in the superhero era of Tony Starks and, super soldier formulas and magic crystals and shit. There's, it's nice to get kind of back to the street level kind of scrappy underdog as your hero.
Yeah, I'm in a chair with handcuffs on, and I'm still gonna make a joke that's gonna make you punch me in the face. Yeah, it's like that. That's what Bruce Willis is bringing in, and he's like, the whole, And I think also the Willy won't-he sort of romantic comedy sort of tension that they're in the movie, where she turns out to be a nun. So like on all these levels, the movies are both sort of like building expectations and subverting those expectations. And that's part of it. And it's like, that's what I really enjoyed about this movie, was the interplay with the actors, the swings that it's taking. And then I think the broader and more absurd the comedy is in this show, the more successful it is, and that's what I liked. A lot of the jokes I thought were terrible, they're like, and the sort of casual racism about movies in the 90s that I don't miss, Yeah. there's like, oh, I don't know about that, the Wong joke that they put in there about there's 631 Wongs in the phone book. And he's like, that's a lot of Wong numbers. And that's a terrible joke. But the worst part is the score does that little like sort of,
yes.
Oh my God, somebody stop them. That was awful. And I was like, So there's little things that just turn you off when you're sort of watching, like that you wish they're the opposite of grace notes. There's little things that hit your ear the wrong way in this movie. You're like, God, I would have cut that, or God, I would have cut that. Yeah. There's a lot of things I would have excised if I could have.
Yeah, I think even on the Wong thing, had they just made it, I mean, the rhyming sound of the two words isn't great, but it's just there were a lot of jokes that they were throwing out that they knew were groaners.
Yeah.
What really, that I groaned when I heard the music cue that they followed it with, of like, not necessary. Like it was fine as it was marginal, but and it wasn't like it lost me. I'd actually forgotten about it.
No, it didn't lose me, but I was like, oh really?
Yeah. But it's I couldn't figure out sometimes if they were intentionally doing groaners or if that's just how the jokes landed. And that's not a great place to be. Like, I like a good movie. I like a good, like, no, the joke is these jokes suck.
Yeah, that's right. No, these are dad jokes.
Yeah.
But I did want them to be a little bit more. They just fell in that middle, the uncanny valley, where it's like, I'm not sure if you meant that joke to suck or what, but it didn't hit, And I think like it's the same. There's good things and there's bad things. Like I love the songs throughout. This sort of, hey, like there's almost like this nod back to, as you were saying, this sort of Dean Martin and Bing Crosby, or Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, like these sort of like or Bob Hope, those kinds of movies where they're sort of evoking the swing era standards and sort of, and sing, like the whole idea that they're using those, synchronizing their watches with
it was really a clever bit. Yeah.
It's a really clever bit, and also those are great songs with great lyrics, and just pull those out. It's like, I love that, just like I've never forgotten Once Around with it Fly Me to the Moon, sort of being the center of that movie. I love it when they pull out those old Hollywood songs and center them in a movie. I love it. On the other hand, nobody's going to know what a Nintendo is. I'm worried about that movie. It does, like, you're building a timeless movie. Why is there a Nintendo joke in here?
And I'm trying to think. You're still at this point. It depends on how disposable you think movies are. It's amazing how much that ends up impacting things. It's right on this weird cutting edge of, like, by the time we were in college, swing and whatnot was showing up. I think that's when I first heard like Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and stuff was like freshman year. And it really kind of hit its peak maybe around like 94, 95. So this is just before all that. So I don't think this movie had any influence on any of that stuff, but it's interesting that it was of the generation of going even back before the 50s, style music. Some of it was, because you're talking Paul Anka was one of the musicians that they were citing. And there's certainly Dean Martin was popular through the 60s. But it's just a really interesting mix of what they were doing with the music. I liked the recurring bit probably more of him knowing exactly how long every song was and knowing why.
That exactly. I love that.
Then I liked the cappuccino thing fine, but I couldn't figure out if they were doing it initially as the action movie thing. And I was very confused when it got shot out of his hand because I hadn't figured out what this movie was yet.
Right.
I was like, you're just shooting guns in an open bar. And then like, when Frank Stallone started talking, I was like, oh, no, they did these things out of order. We needed to have met Frank Stallone first, and then that happened.
Right.
So we understood the context of what was going on. And we haven't even talked about the ambulance scene, which is maybe one of the highlights of the movie for me.
It really is. The ambulance scene is a super great scene. And it's one of the things that makes it an action movie. But it's also hilarious. And
I was laughing my ass off during that sequence in a way that I wasn't for long stretches of the rest of the movie. The choreography on it is absolutely fantastic. And like, what is the girl in the convertibles like, Mister, are you gonna die? Or like, the timing on it was just chef's kiss.
Yeah. And he wasn't sure whether he was or not, but it's great. That the hospital, he's on the gurney and riding down the freeway on a hospital bed.
I was like, John Wick 3 and his horse on the road has nothing on this.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I just, the whole movie, and I give Bruce Willis props. He knows what movie he's making. And so he knows he's very over the top. When he first meets Andy McDowell, he's like, well, he might as well say hubba bubba, He's like, he has that, he's very clearly communicating, oh, she's my love interest. And I'm like, she's hot. And he's like, in a way that it's almost like he's in a silent movie, the way he's acting, because he's like taking these very elaborate visual cues and his facial features throughout the movie. He would have been a hell of a silent movie actor just because his reaction shots, he's so good at that. He has his face is so expressive and he's got such command over it. You could just watch Bruce Willis's face in this movie and sort of know what's going on. And that's a testament to him. Like, he knows what movie he's in. Not everybody else does. Yeah. And I agree with you though. Andy McDowell, this works for her. Same way, actually, I think Groundhog Day works for her. It might as well be the same character, this sort of chaste, straight woman, in the sense that she's a great comic foil for this guy who's insane, basically. And really plays off well against that, just with her little, Mona Lisa smiles, no pun intended. Yeah. Back to the original sight gag. But she really has that quality where she can just with just a very subtle smile or the way she talks, she is like, hey, she very believably say, hey, I'm into this guy. And you believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why it's even funnier when you find out she's anyway. But yeah,
when you find out she's a nun, right? That's exactly right.
But yeah, I would tell people if you've only ever heard super negative things about this movie, we cannot guarantee you this is going to be to your taste. I mean, I would never do that in a million years. But if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it's at like 30%. It's, floating in Metacritic super low. But if you think about who the critics were at the time, I think this movie was both ahead of its time and handicapped by its time. And I would say definitely, I mean, it's only an hour, 45 minutes. That's not too bad. Give it a shot. It's got more to offer than what you've heard.
Is it worse than the third Austin Powers movie? No, it's not. I mean, like, just go see it. Watch this movie. It's like the money is all on screen. Like, you can see the money in terms of a 1991 movie. I really think the performances are great. There's some tonal issues with it, and we've talked about those, but we probably sounded more negative than we should have, because I'm with you. I really like this movie. There's a lot to recommend it. It's got 3 different heists in it, and it's like, or 2, I guess, but it just has a lot of interesting bits, and the crooks in this movie are great. They're just really, really funny between, being in there, and they're just chewing the scenery. I really, it's not successful all the way, but it has a lot to recommend it.
Yeah. It would have been interesting to see, had this been successful, what the impact would have been with imitators and, a sequel, certainly, even more Hudson Hawk, but was not to be. It was critically panned. I'm trying to remember why I didn't go see it when it came out. I have to think something was going on in my world, and because Bruce Willis and Sandra Bernhard and some of the other stuff that was, an action comedy sort of thing, was absolutely in my wheelhouse at the time. But I'll figure out what week it came out and figure out if that was like against the Steen's Family Vacation or something. But I remember hearing very quickly it bad. So
this was right when I was big. I had started reading movie magazines, and it was huge. Entertainment Weekly, Rolling Stone. I was reading all the entertainment magazines I could get my hands on. So I was very tuned into the critical reception of this movie, and I had to go see it just because I was like, anything that this uniformly hated is probably pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And I was right. And I walked out of there thinking, I like this movie. My friend who I went to see it, I think it was Paul Dorman. I think I saw this with Paul Dorman. I don't remember him liking it, but I liked it.
This does not seem like something Paul would have liked. No.
But it was totally up my alley. And I probably liked it better then than now. But I think part of that is because I spent a lot of time rewatching the movie, thinking how ahead of its time this movie feels.
Yes.
Because this is Coen Brothers. This is Wes Anderson. This is like, in terms of like, I'm going to build a dollhouse, and some weird shit's going to go on, and it's going to look unlike anything else. That's kind of what this movie should have been. And they don't all the way get there, but somebody like Tim Burton, somebody like, the Coen brothers, somebody like Wes Anderson could have done that and probably pulled it off a little bit better. Quentin Tarantino in a different way, but it really needed that coherence, that the sort of coherent vision that like one of those kind of like, I don't know, capital F filmmakers would have brought to it.
Well, yeah, and we talked about how they didn't, the critical reception to Hudsucker Proxy, but I mean, it really is interesting how critics had a hard time with the Coen brothers too. Like movies that you understood, because I didn't read any damn reviews of like Miller's Crossing when it came out. But when we were doing the podcast about a year ago, I went and read some, and it was not like, a few people really got it and were like, yeah, this is awesome. But there were a lot of critics. So that's, we're now in a world where everyone has a damn podcast and talks about movies and flaps their gums on Twitter and whatnot. But it's interesting to see this stuff that, like, you realize movies always need like a 20-year cycle of going back and looking and going, okay, now what does this mean within this context? We're at 30 years now with this. And one of the things you will see if you Google this movie is a lot of people going, we're going to reevaluate this movie 20, 30 years on.
Right.
And kind of give it its props that it didn't get at the time. And I think this is one of those. So.
It is one of those things. It's like, I think, like, I put this movie in the same bucket as, and it's just really hard for these movies to be successful. This is Cabin Boy, Yeah. This is Joe versus the volcano. It's just a weird fantasy. And if you are not on the movie's wavelength, it's not going to work for you.
Yeah.
And like, now I say Cabin Boy. Cabin Boy is awful. Cabin Boy is legit a bad movie. But again, you see something so it's such a big swing. It's like, I saw that in the theater too. And I was just like, I'm sort of taken by it still, just because it did all that, just because it exists. And
I love Cabin Boy.
Yeah. And so it's like, it's the same thing. It's just like, I know what this is, but it's like, this is it's so bad, it's good school. And I don't want to say that because this is not quite on the level of Cabin Boy in that department, but like Big Trouble in Little China is maybe probably the most successful sort of absurdist action comedy thing I can think of.
Yeah. And we did Big Trouble in Little China, I think on like our 4th podcast or something, but it's definitely one I think falls into the same sort of world. But with that, I hope you guys all go check out Hudson Hawk, and we will be back soon. Hopefully, maybe we'll get Michael to actually show up for one of these, that he will not rather have COVID than once again.
We definitely got to get Michael back and get him to do the recap. All right, sir.
All right. You have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Doesn't matter at all. Well, we've all had the quarrels in the party. It will be the same as we started. Just sailing along, singing a song. Side by side. I said traveling, singing side by side. Side by side. Let's go to Las Vegas.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.